Slowly, we can begin to understand what the Beatles have done with media with the help of Toon and Reagan, their allies. What happened to me was the assumption that these were not people who would cooperate with the AIDS attack. Zappa, for example, proclaimed himself a big comment man on the topic. The Bowie's Diamond Dogs future legend was not meant to be taken literally. That The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was a fantasy. These were the original word salad people. And what they did was they hijacked me into their media system and started playing back things like Gabriel's refrain, "This is for real." So I would believe that they were not cooperating with the assassins, that they were concerned to know the truth. And so I would go to them in their office of Amnesty International to represent the reality that I had not hurt anybody. And these were people were zeroing in on me as an object of assassination. When the duplicity was coming into view, the duplicity was that the leader of the sex revolution, John Lennon, had somehow escaped and was now the sword of revenge on the sexual revolution, holding the knife to the throat of those who would believe in sexual freedom. There were always reasons not to go the road of sexual license. But if I was forced to make a decision between investigating and finding help for the risk and preserving my chastity so that Pope Carl would shine upon my house, I would rather try to help rescue people. I figured it was important to know what was going on. And I was trying to warn people, get warning and help. Of course, they disallowed that motive because they were obstructing attempts to warn. They wanted to get as many people sick as they possibly could. So there was duplicity. They pretended that they were representing the victims when in reality they were covering for the assassins. Now look at a good example. When Migno Wen, Amanda Harcourt, Oliver Stone represented it as a revealed and given truth that Reagan had nothing to do with it, that he was a victim, that he was targeted and his name was used, and it came from below. Penis Gabriel put into circulation someone smaller with less visibility. And it was typical of the way that they funhoused the media with this hot wiring system, that they would just drop that phrase and allow it to impregnate itself as a barb into the psychology of their revolution. So they were the original word salad magnates, thinking that they understood what was going on and were trying to help. I answered them in kind and was shuffleboarded into the psychiatric ward when they detonated a neuroplasm. I was told, you can't go to school because you'll just fail. You don't have this. You go veering off in untoward directions. In other words, you go veering off in direction of the truth when we're trying to establish a brainwash. And they don't like that. I ended up in Phi Theta Kappa. 4 years in college, I was in honors. Well, be that as may, Psi Beta and all that. But the evidence shows that there actually is empirical evidence that Reagan was in on the whole thing. The evidence shows that. The evidence from whom the killers presented shows that he was almost certainly in on the Kennedy assassination. Almost certainly. Shows that. So where does Migno Wen and Amanda Harcourt and Oliver Stone get off announcing that he was the pure victim and only the victim and can only be construed as or questioned or represented or investigated or questioned or researched as the victim and no other thing? when the evidence clearly indicates that there are contrary indications that he was involved all along, that it was his brainstorm, that it was his idea. And that's the reality of what they're pulling. So when you look at the Hitler's cinema, they talk about a timeless, in a mirror where cinema appears, and cinema appears in the mirror. A timeless moment where cinema has a revolution between reality and fiction, celebrating itself. Well, that's what they did. The spinning mirror idea was their idea of a revolution. They were going to take charge of reality by convincing people of something that was not true and make them believe it. That's what make-believe means, force to believe. Make them believe it. They take make-believe to such an extreme that it became coercion. You must believe it and take control that way. And they had the principle of, well, Hitler died in a bunker. Well, he escaped to Argentina. They had the principle of JFK being murdered over Hiroshima. No, that was Yoko Ono getting revenge for John Lennon in time warp, they claim. Well, the evidence is clear what the revolutions indicates. Two versions, pussy ball. It's in the telltale clip in the arrangements with Alpin as the Lady Panther with Dixon, and the way Seattle castrated me, gave me Parkinson's, then insisted on poisoning me, threatening to poison me again, and all while saying, I don't respect them. When I took 2 years of classes, 8 classes in Black Studies, I got A's in all of them. I did all that work. I did all of that study. I passed all of those tests. I wrote all of those essays for nothing because they considered it interfering with the way the NAACP, Green Party, Black Panthers were intending to and believe they have the right to use me. I never ask anybody after their money. These people were so obsessed they set up a penny on the sidewalk and Ripper murdered Shannon Harps. That's why I got banned from Seattle Central, because I tried to save her life. I knew they were going to do something like that, and they did it. And nobody cared because they're making believe. They're making you believe. You must believe. Must believe what? That Will Zellbrun, who extolled Joseph Goebbels in his own hand, threatened me with AIDS in his own hand, talked about a scheme to transform the human race by injecting the blood as proven before AIDS happened, and ran the AIDS operation on Mount Desert Island through the Gurdjieff Society with Penis Gabriel, a white freako Nazi from the Green Party, is honorary the African warrior, they said, because he was going to fulfill what they wanted to do with the white who was interfering by protesting apartheid. That was interference. And who did they have on the line? They had Brian Eno and Vladimir Putin on the line backing them up. And they can't understand that you have to look at both sides. You have a revolving mirror where the mirror only is allowed to be understood. The mirror is only allowed to be believed. Anything else must be banned from school. We're starting to see what Peter Gabriel and his officers have been pulling all along. And they call me word salad. They call me word salad, the freaks that wrote the weirdest lyrics that ever made money. And you're supposed to say, oh, but they were beautiful, weird lyrics. They're accusing somebody else of writing weird poetry. They don't want it to make sense. They don't want you to understand in the context that the first album that they called An Observation was a human ecology experiment conducted with Attica State Prison psychiatrists to justify AIDS as moral war. And they tried to kill me. And they even said we may yet for trying to get help for their victims. I warned in 1994 that Israel was engaged in revenge for Auschwitz. And I was completely ignored, shut down, called word salad, taunted, poisoned, stalked, tortured, terrorized. And people in Palestine don't dare say anything about it because they're involved in the moral agency that pulled this hustle. And they formed these alliances of personality cults who come in swinging at you because you questioned their doctrine. That's right, I do question your doctrine. I was trying to get warning to people, and you were making pretend about my motives so that you could cancel my attempts to warn, because you didn't want anybody to be warned. If they had listened in 1994, we would have the same old Gaza, semi-prosperous if poor, today. But they refused because they didn't want any of that. They did not want to save lives. These Beatles would rather go around peppering your food with noxious substances than share any kind of meaningful relationship, health, welfare, or education. Banning a scholar from school, they call justified by word salad. They are the originators of the whole idea of word salad. They were the people who initiated that whole movement. So the indecencies of molesting somebody because maybe there's some bad news in what I have to say to you is an indecency. It's a double cross.